Hello and welcome to the Big Red for America show. This is Big Red again here with my producer Mark.
Hello.
We've got a full set here today to talk through. We're going to talk about what happened with student loan forgiveness. We're going to talk about what happened with the red wave that ended up being more of a red trickle, and then we'll finally finish it up looking forward to 2024. Ready to get into it, Mark?
Let's do it.
So where we left off last time, I think student loan forgiveness was paused. But it hadn't been actually overturned yet. Is that where we left off?
Yeah. I think there was some cases in court, and we were waiting on those last time. And as of now, last I heard, was it was paused because of I think I don't remember what level of court, but I think the next level up is Supreme Court. It has to go through, and it's basically on pause until all the appeals and stuff are done with it. But the big news with the pause is a few things. Number one is actually the judge that did it. If you get a chance, everyone should go read it. Man, he tears into Biden and the overreach that
Yeah.
Biden's doing.
Well, yeah. I mean, it absolutely is an overreach because Pelosi in July, when she was asked about it, she said that the president can't do this. She says, I have a direct quote from her here, quote, the president can't do it. So she says that's not even a discussion. Not everybody realizes that, but the president can only postpone, but not forgive. So we have Pelosi saying that in July, and then obviously he forgives it, whether it's in August or whenever he quote unquote forgives it, really just transfers all that debt to the taxpayers. But it's interesting. Yeah, it's an absolute overreach. We have Pelosi, who's definitely a big government kind of gal, saying he can't do it. So I don't understand why Biden got the idea that he could.
I'll tell you exactly what the idea of why he thinks he can do it is, because he doesn't think he can do it. What he thinks he can do is he thinks that he's able to gin up support in base and then forcibly get it done, or use it to his advantage on a political sense, of which we all know, like, if you look at the record turnout for the midterms was, mainly the group of people, of young kids who were in college debt, happened to be one of the biggest groups to push the Democrats in a lot of races. And not only that, but the kind of ongoing divisiveness of, look what I'm trying to do to help you. These conservatives are evil human beings. You can't let them have any power or control, or they're going to ruin your life. And that's sort of the narrative. And I guarantee they're going to keep that narrative going until the next election.
Oh, absolutely. I'm a degenerate on Twitter. You can follow Big Red for America on Twitter, and listening to what's her name? Elizabeth Warren, Pocahontas, saying that we're forgiving student debt. We're doing something for the people, but it's those nasty Republicans that why do they just want to hurt you good, hardworking American people? Even though we talked about it last show that most of this money's going to the upper class. The vast majority of it's going to the upper class. That's where most of the debt is. It's people with doctorates, are the people who hold most of this debt. So it's not even going to where it says it goes. But like you said, gin up support. People don't really pay attention or really know this. They think like, oh, my loans are going to be forgiven, so I'm going to go out and vote Democrat.
Yeah, and then it's, when it comes to student loans, just first off, read the thing the judge wrote. Everybody who's listening to this, because it's a really great example. He goes through pretty good detail on why it's an overreach. But it goes back to the whole, the president that unites the country, which is our current president. This is yet another thing he's doing that he knows he can't do and he's not allowed to do. But all it's going to do is sow kind of hatred towards the other people on the other aisle, on both sides of it. Because most of the blue collar middle class, people with out there working every day in the field, doing whatever, plumbing, HVAC, all that stuff. Most of them went to tech schools or trade schools, didn't go to college, so they're probably not in debt, or at least not with federal student loans. And they're the people who are going, "What? Wait, Democrats used to help me. Now they're making me pay for all these other people's debts."
Mm-hmm.
What's going on here? And it's a weird dynamic because they're shifting over, and then you have a lot of the elites that are now openly campaigning as like the median conglomerates
Mm-hmm.
about how it's pro forgive this debt type deal.
Yeah. I actually found I'm reading an article right now where they have Pelosi before, so obviously that quote where it's like, yeah, it's not even a discussion. Biden absolutely can't forgive this debt. And then after he forgave it, the quote is, well, we're excited about the president because we didn't know what authority the president had to do this. And now clearly it seems he has the authority to do this. So that's interesting that President Biden somehow magically found his some sort of legal authority to do this, even though, like you said, the the judges slap it down as an overreach. I think the Supreme Court will do the same. But even Biden's Department of Education said the exact thing. They said Biden, quote, does not have the statutory authority to cancel, compromise, discharge, or forgive on a blanket or mass basis principal balances of student loans. So I guess it's good to see Biden get smacked down. I will have to find that opinion because I'm a nerd. I love reading opinions, and of course, I love reading opinions where the Democrats get smacked down. I've read several of Clarence Thomas's opinions, and they're gold.
Yeah, this is a good one for you to read. The other thing about the student loans is Biden at one point, or I don't know if it was Biden, it might have been Pelosi, but someone in the upper echelon of Democrats, trying to explain how this was a thing that could go through. There's at one point where they were trying to spin it as because of this pandemic, this ongoing health pandemic with COVID, and because of all the financial harm that's come because of the pandemic, that this is a state of emergency. That's how he has the authority to do it. I don't remember exact wordings they used, but here's the hilarious part. He did that. I think they actually went. It might have been this judge or a different court case about the student loan debt forgiveness. And that was like the lawyers argued that in front of the judge. And then the next day, Biden gave a speech. And in his speech, I don't know if it's exact words, but he almost verbatim says, because of my leadership, the pandemic is over. There's no more need for this fear. And he says that. So he's like literally going out and saying the opposite of what his lawyers are arguing for in court. And I think they backed away from that narrative probably because of the president saying the opposite of what they're saying.
That's interesting that you brought that up, because I remember reading an article that said exact same thing. Biden says that the pandemic is over, but the White House, like the next day, the White House extends the COVID-19 pandemic. They still say they're in a state of emergency. They extended it, I think, till the end of this year. And I don't know, maybe it had something to do with that argument. I didn't even think about that, but I just thought that was funny. Biden's like, yeah, it's over. And the White House is like, wait, that means we could lose power potentially. No. Don't say it's over. It'll never be over. No, it won't be over until everyone gets their 99th booster.
Well, actually, to that point, and this is what's scary about what happens in the future. And this is a whole longer conversation that'd be interesting to have. But the pandemic gave a lot of the government overreach that a lot of liberals have wanted for a long time. And the old saying of government is, once you give the government power, you can't take it away.
Yeah.
Even if it's temporary. So now that they have this overreach, and this overreach under this disguise of pandemic emergency going on, when are we ever going to have a time where we are no longer in a pandemic or an emergency? And if that seems extreme, that we're not like what I'm saying, that we're always going to be in a state of pandemic emergency, I just want to point out Chicago just said, because they said COVID was the pandemic for COVID, the national emergency for COVID was over. I think it was like the same day or the next day, they said the federal gun violence is a national pandemic and they're in their state of emergency. And so within 24 hours, they found another thing to put under state of emergency, which my point being is that gives them extra powers outside of the normal law.
Mm-hmm.
So is it ever going to be a time where they are no longer in a state of emergency, so they don't have those powers anymore? My guess is no. We're going to be in a constant state of emergency because you can't take powers away from a government once you give them the powers.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's why I feel like it's always a good idea to try to limit government power, because they're never going to hand it back. The government's job, and this is what I'm always saying, the government's job is not to take care of you, the citizen. The government's job is to perpetuate itself, to grow its power, which is why it really takes concerned citizens to try to limit that. And if not, it can quickly get out of hand. Like you said, anything's a state of emergency. Anything's a state of emergency is a reason for me to exercise some sort of unilateral or dictatorial power. That's often how that goes. So I'm not surprised that Biden's extending the COVID pandemic. And like you said, maybe we'll never stop. We'll never stop that being in a COVID state, unless hopefully once Biden leaves office, we'll finally be pandemic free.
Well, it'll just shift to something else, because I don't think that's exclusive to the Democrats. Government has always grown under Republicans as well as Democrats, or at least mostly it's grown under Republicans as well as Democrats. It's not exclusive. It just grows a lot more under Democrats. But, there's been plenty of instances where some government agency was created that didn't need created, and it was under a Republican. Yeah, it's not exclusive. That's, like you said, that's just the nature of government. It's not nature of a party.
Yeah.
Now, granted, Democrats tend to take a larger chunk of that and go a little bit further with it. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I just hope the COVID pandemic will be ended, not the never-ending quest for governments to grow and get more power.
Well, that's the interesting thing that you're starting to see is there's this weird, and this is what you get when you have the power of basically the entire media behind you, is the liberals and Democrats are walking this really fine line narrative, and no one, they can barely get away with it, let alone anyone else. And a good example, I got two of them. The first one is the Stacey Abrams, where she was during the midterms, and we could talk about this when we talk about the midterms in more detail, but she had this narrative where there's all this voter fraud happening and it's terrible and all this stuff, and how anybody anybody going to vote there's this suppression in Georgia, even though it had this huge turnout. So the Democrats leaned into that while simultaneously, like all Democrats leaned into that, while simultaneously saying that anybody who denies an election is the death of democracy.
Yeah.
So because of that, Stacey Abrams, who's a known election denier, like she's famous for it, she's in this weird catch-22 where if she loses, which she did, she has to admit to election. She has to admit to being defeated, because if she denies it, she's one of the people who's trying to destroy democracy. So there's these weird catch-22s they're putting themselves in, and Biden's doing it like we just talked about with the COVID-19, where he's on one hand saying he has to relieve student loan forgiveness because of this state of emergency, and that's how he has a power, where then on the other hand, he's telling the general public that because of his leadership, there's no more emergency because of COVID. He saved the world.
Yeah.
But, you can't have two things that are opposites be true at the same time. That's not possible. So there's this weird dynamic, and the only way you can get away with that is when you have basically the world's biggest horn tooting it for you,
Yeah, absolutely, because that's the benefit the Democrat media has, talking about Stacey Abrams. Whenever we'd hear all this dangerous, like the election deniers are running for positions in offices nationwide, and they would list, a whole bunch of Republicans. But you know what? To your point, I never saw Stacey Abrams in that list.
And or Hillary Clinton. There's a lot of well-known election, deniers out there.
I think even Joe Biden called the election for Al Gore in 2000. So, I mean, I think that goes to a bigger problem in American politics. Well, it's with humans in general, that we never want to admit defeat, but just rather that someone else disenfranchised us. But while we're on the topic, let's continue moving through. Let's move right through to the midterms. It was supposed to be a red wave, but turned into a red trickle. So what do you think happened with that?
Well, if you guys remember from the last episode, I called that it was not going to be a red wave. I said don't trust the polls. Polls have never been right. They're never right, and they've been getting worse and worse over the last 8-10 years. And I said, if they say it's a red wave, it's probably going to be a red trickle or maybe not anything at all. So I don't want to say I am the best political mind out there right now, but some people have said that about me.
It was me.
Yeah.
But so I guess that was disappointing. I was really hoping for more action from the Republicans, but I think I got caught up. Definitely a little bit of a Republican echo chamber there on social media, even though I try to get information from various different news sources. But even on the quote unquote impartial ones that tend to lean to the more Democrat side, they were portraying like what started as, Republicans were always going to win the House, but I was looking at the Senate seats, the governor's seats. We were looking at 50% chance, 60% chance to take the Senate. So I was definitely getting excited about that, following the polls specifically here in Arizona, like we were talking about, following the polls in Pennsylvania and other places like obviously Georgia, Nevada. I thought for sure, hopefully we're going to get away with more seats, actually hold the majority in the Senate, but that didn't quite happen. So maybe I just kind of thinking about this now, maybe the doom and gloom that we were talking about with COVID, that the media is just blasting out, maybe that helped stir some Democrats to go out and vote. They're like, oh man, like you said, if Republicans get elected, it's the end of democracy. If Republicans get elected, we're going to go back to the ancient times where women are property of men and can't do anything. They can't have an abortion. They can't kill their unborn child. So maybe that got a lot of people up and voting. Like you said, Gen Z, young kids voted overwhelmingly Democrat. Single women voted overwhelmingly Democrat. So that constant media narrative and then blasting red wave may have inspired a lot of Democrats to get out and vote.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely pretty gross, some of the tactics that were taken near the end on the Democrat side, where I mean, for lack of a better word, they just blatantly lied, saying things like, if you vote for anyone other than us, then you are literally voting for democracy to fall apart and die. Mm-hmm. And then if you asked, which I don't know why there wasn't more of these questions asked, probably because the narrative's all controlled by them. But if I heard once or twice, they said, well, how is that true? What are they going to do? And they had no answer for it, because all it is meant to do is scare people into ginning them up to come out and vote. So that's why the end of democracy and how all your abortion rights are getting taken away and you will no longer have autonomy over your body. And those were like the big, huge Democrat issues, because those are the ones that, when you throw them out there, it's fear mongering. They lied about what it means for the abortion thing, because they said no matter what, if you vote them in a federal level, they're going to get rid of everything. It's like, well, that's not what happened. It's now on a state level. Like they're not even trying to pretend to explain it or say it in the actual way of what's going on around you. Because at the end of the day, all they want you to do is feel like the other people are so terrible and evil that you morally cannot vote for them. That's their role.
I think part of it is because Democrats expect Republicans to govern like Democrats. What I mean by that is, of course, Joe Biden said, give me 2 Democratic senators and we'll get rid of the filibuster. We'll push my agenda through over the minority. We'll make this a tyrannical government. Like, give me 2 senators and that will happen. So I think the Democrats anticipated Republicans retaking the Senate, getting rid of the filibuster, just slamming all this stuff through, and really trying to govern like Democrats. And that's what scares them, is these Republicans get offices, and they, in my experience, obviously biased towards the Republican side, but we get into office, don't change a whole lot, try to work through the process. Not a whole lot gets done like it was intended. It was intended, so not a lot gets done. But then Democrats come through, rework the system, or take advantages of holes in the system, and push stuff through that way. Because even if Republicans got 2 seats, and yes, they may have but they weren't going to override the filibuster. Like they weren't going to get rid of the filibuster. A nationwide abortion ban would have never passed Congress. And most importantly, a nationwide abortion ban would have been struck down by the Supreme Court because it's not within the federal purview to say anything about abortion. But no one thinks that far ahead. Everyone thinks the worst. And part of it is, like you said, gin up support, drive people out to the election and get things our way, towards the Democrats, so then they can do stuff like that. So they can change rules so they can pass their legislation or stuff the Supreme Court like they talked about doing, which I think it was foolish for Republicans to not push harder to get the Senate, because now, Biden, if he decides, can add more people to the Supreme Court. We're still relying on Manchin and Sinema to not, like, we're still relying on Democrats to help us really save this republic. So I just think it was foolish on Republicans' part, and we can have a discussion about this, whether it was poor candidates, because obviously Dr. Oz, not the strongest candidate, couldn't beat John Fetterman, who can barely put sentences together. I think Mark Kelly was beatable. I don't think Blake Masters was a great candidate against him there and here in Arizona. So I just think, unfortunately, Republicans let some bad candidates get on the ticket too.
Yeah, not all of them are bad candidates. Like, yes, I do not think Oz was a great candidate, but he does have name recognition, and I mean, he wasn't horrible. He wasn't great either. Mm-hmm. But there's also, we can't pretend there wasn't all this funny business going on. For example, Pennsylvania changed their laws in 2020 because of COVID. Unilaterally, they didn't do it according to the state constitution, and they basically never changed them back. That's pretty funny business. But then even on top of that, it is funny business when, and you heard this because I live in Pennsylvania, but there were people who voted for Fetterman that never realized how bad he was until after the debate, and then but they had already cast their votes. Yeah. So most people don't realize that Fetterman didn't come out publicly and make an appearance or debate or do anything like that until like 2 weeks after voting had started in Pennsylvania. And
that's excellent electioneering on campaigning on his part, because when you have election season, when you start voting in October, even earlier, like obviously a lot can happen and you might want to change your vote, which is why, election reform is a topic for another discussion, but that's absolutely true. Speaking of funny business, we had some funny business here in Arizona. But
you guys had a lot of funny business in Arizona.
Still have some funny business. Hopefully we have some recourse through that, even though I don't know what would happen. Maricopa County is still planning on certifying their election, despite a whole bunch of concerns on election day. I don't know if anybody who's listening to this followed the news, but an estimate of 30 to 50% of voting machines were out of commission on election day, despite having no issues the day previous or during all of early election voting, according to the Attorney General of Arizona. 60 out of the 70, depending what source you're listening to, 60 out of the 70 of these were in heavy Republican districts. And obviously any sort of election tabulator or ballot misprint thing that happens on election day is going to disproportionately affect Republicans over Democrats, because since 2020, Republicans tend to vote more in person and vote on election day. So I believe it was the Arizona Sun-Times said 300% more Republicans were affected than Democrats. Obviously, there was some misinformation, hopefully inadvertently spread by the supervisor of Maricopa County, who said on Twitter that you could just check out if your voting location was having either tabulator or printer problems. That was not correct. You would have to sign out of that your location. That was not rectified on Twitter, to my knowledge, until 4 hours later. So he tweets out in the morning, you can just leave if your place is having issues. Maricopa County then tweets out 4 hours later, you actually have to check out. According to the AG's letter, poll workers weren't trained on how to check out. So all these people who left voting locations to go to another voting location, they had to cast a provisional ballot. According to Arizona law, if you've checked in, you cannot vote in another location, which is obviously common sense, trying to prevent people from casting ballots in multiple locations. So all of those provisional ballots that were cast don't count, which is very convenient. And there's no legal recourse for that. That would have to be an extensive audit again of to try to recognize where these people checked in. They didn't cast a ballot at this location, so they're not voting twice, they're just voting once with this provisional ballot. I think that would take a lot of work. The board supervisors have no incentive to overturn that to not certify the election, because it makes them look incompetent for the second election in a straight election in a row. But
here's a question for you.
What?
Let's just think this through. So let's remove partisan politics. Let's pretend we don't know who's doing what. It's just all human beings. We don't know what side of the aisle they're on, right? Where are the repercussions going to happen to the people in charge of the election? Then my next question is, so if we want to make sure, because if it was this bad, there needs to be some kind of repercussions to whoever was in charge, so things can get better. That's how life works, you know? So if we want to make sure there's repercussions or, something that improves this process because of the failures of the people who ran it, let's talk about who was that person who ran it who then gets repercussions. Who is that? Oh, that happens to the person that got elected.
Yeah. So in Arizona, the Secretary of State is an elected position. So the Secretary of State, Katie Hobbs, was also running for governor. So her being over this election and certifying it despite the problems is definitely on the cheeky side. And same with the mayor. I believe he was the Maricopa County supervisor or something before, but our new Secretary of State was also in charge of Maricopa County in some respect, I believe, in the last election. So he just got a nice job promotion. The Board of Supervisors just got a pay raise. So, I mean, we're just really rewarding these people for a really horrible election, putting out these horrible elections. So I don't know.
Yeah, and you can, at the end of the day, not putting blame on anyone, not saying Katie Hobbs totally stole this thing or whatever, but it is not a good look, Democrat or Republican, that the person running the election is also the person in the election at the same time. Like, the person in charge of making sure it's fraud-free is also the person in the election out of two people. Like, that's just not a good look. And if you come at, like, I have friends who are Democrats, and they're very much believe that there's nothing funny out there in Arizona happening, but they admit it's hard to say that it's appropriate for the person in the election to be the one who's also in charge of overseeing the election.
Yeah.
There's no good way to explain yourself out of that.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a little not super great. I don't understand how they're allowed to run the election and not step down or not leave office and what, I'm not going to certify this election because I'm up for it. But then it gets into hard spots because they are an elected position. But they should have to step down. But at the same time, Arizona had 2 years to fix this. We had a Republican governor, Republican House, Republican Senate, chose to do none of it, and now we're facing the consequences. So either, whether it was intentional or not, we're going to have a Democrat governor, we're going to have a Democrat Secretary of State. In Arizona, the courts say that the Secretary of State can unilaterally change election laws despite whether it violates Arizona law or not. So Katie Hobbs was in favor of same-day registration, of not having to vote in of your appropriate precinct. So whether or not this will increase fraud, I'm not going to say. I mean, obviously, if we make the elections more confusing, there's a higher chance of some sort of funny business happening. But now we're going to see, I believe, forever 3 weeks counting votes. there's always going to be something hinky in Maricopa County, which of course is going to spin Arizona blue for the Democrats. So I truly think the outcome of this election means we will never see another Republican win statewide house in terms of of a statewide house that matters, like attorney general, governor, or secretary of state again in Arizona.
I am not that pessimistic. I think there will be one again because I think the pendulum always swings, and especially, if you look at since the era of Trump, we'll put it that way, the pendulum swings pretty wide. It's a pretty big swing. So whether it's 4 years, 8 years, 10 years, who knows? But I do think it'll come back. A good example of that from the midterms to change states on you was, even though it's supposed to be this huge upset and it wasn't, it is not like that's a loss for this guy. But Lee Zeldin did something, or just about did something, got the closest basically any conservatives ever gotten to in the last 20 years, probably, or 10 years or something. But he got really close to doing a big upset, and that's a big deal because of New York City. That's a big deal. Conservatives and Republicans have to realize that it's just because it wasn't a big red wave does not mean it was all bad news for conservatives. That's not what happened. It was definitely a rebuke of Biden in the midterms. We did win. We won the House. We lost some Senate seats, yes. But we were basically at the same spot we were before. And a lot of the governor's races, a lot of the races that weren't supposed to be close ended up being close. A lot of the races that we were supposed to win and we didn't, and there's this narrative out there where conservatives lost where they should have won because it was this big deal. A lot of those races, if you look 6 months ago, 8 months ago, we were not supposed to win them.
Yeah, that's true.
It was not close.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, Kerry Lake overcame like at least a 5-point deficit that the elections within, it's like, trying to do math really quick, it's under 1%, 0.6%. So that's that you're right. I guess I shouldn't be super pessimistic, but we did do better than we were at least originally anticipated. But I was hoping with momentum going into the midterms that we would have a little bit of a better outcome.
Yeah, and I think we need to take lessons from two races, right? Is the DeSantis, or basically every race that happened in Florida. Because what was supposed to be from the Democrat news was a referendum on DeSantis, and it's supposed to be a close race, ended up being just an absolute slacking by DeSantis and every conservative or Republican in Florida. And then Brian Kemp finally, I think, got the most well-known election denier to admit losing an election, apparently.
He unseated incumbent Governor Stacey Abrams. That is impressive.
Yeah, technically, he beat the president of the world.
Wow. I mean, that's impressive.
If you're a Star Trek fan. Yeah.
So there must have been some serious voter suppression going on. What did Georgia? Did they have record low turnout for early voting or something like that? Is that how Jim Crow 2.0 worked in Georgia?
Yeah, that's what it seems like, right? Even though there's record turnout, it was still voter suppression, which is a remarkable thing to hear.
Yeah. So sorry, record high turnout. I got my wires crossed there, but yeah, record high early voting turnout in Georgia. That it still goes to the Republicans. So that pokes a big hole in the election suppression narrative there that the Democrats are constantly crying about. Yeah.
So that's good news. Because that's a big rebuke too. Because Stacey Abrams was also, she was like the new Beto. She was the future of the Democratic Party. So the fact that she not only lost, but she lost actually by a bigger margin than the first go around against the same dude. You would think it would have been a closer race, but it wasn't. So that's good news. So I think, if anything, conservatives should learn the style of politics they're doing. It seems to be what is getting libertarians and more moderate people to kind of swing over.
Yeah, and that's I think there's definitely a good case study to pull from Ron DeSantis, absolutely like blowing up his margin of victory. I mean, 20 points here. Same with Marco Rubio, also I think Ron DeSantis's popularity carried into Marco Rubio, because I don't know if Marco Rubio
Mm-hmm.
himself is necessarily energetic like DeSantis is, but he got like 600,000 more Republicans to register in Florida, completely changing the voter makeup of Florida. I mean, that's huge. I think Florida's in good hands, at least for the next 4 years. Same thing obviously same thing in Georgia. Brian Kemp extends his lead. Beto O'Rourke, professional election loser, lost again.
Not only that, he got spanked too, if I remember right.
Yeah, that was supposed to be a close race. Greg Abbott runs away with 10% of the vote. So I guess you're right. There are some positive things to take away from this midterm election. I shouldn't be so sad as I am, but I'm just sad going to be living under Katie Hobbs, who's as interesting as like a beige wall here. So I think the next few years for me are going to be pretty terrible, but we'll see. We'll see what happens with all these shenanigans. We're going to take a quick break, have a sponsored message here, and then we'll come back and talk about 2024. Looking forward to that election. Alrighty, thank you, Anchor, for that wonderful sponsorship there, making this venture profitable somewhat, I guess. So let's look forward. We have some takeaways from 2022. Looking forward to 2024. Trump got out early and announced that he will be running for president again in 2024. How do you feel about that?
I don't think he should do it. Mm-hmm. I don't think he should run. I think he would be much more beneficial if he sat it out, just worked from behind the scenes. He could still be someone in the party and doing his thing. But I think one thing the midterm showed was it wasn't like everyone was a lot of the races were closer than they should have been, or were not what they should have been because of Trump. Mm-hmm. Granted, there were some races that Trump did help out a lot too. I'll give him that. But he's too big of a character at this point, I think. Too many people hate him to the point where they're just going to vote against him to vote against him. And that's what I saw in the midterms.
And I think that's excellent. That's an excellent takeaway. We saw the same thing here. Like, obviously, if Trump's appointed candidates did extremely poorly in a lot of the battleground states, like obviously Oz lost big in Pennsylvania, Mastriano lost even worse. Across the board here in Arizona, Trump endorsed candidates went down the entire ticket. Lake, Masters, Abe is technically down 500 votes, but I think if we do a recount, he'll be pushed over. I think he will end up winning if we do a recount here in Arizona. And then Mark Fincham, who went up for Secretary of State, lost big here in Arizona. You see the same thing in other battleground states. Trump endorsed candidates didn't do so hot. So I think for him, that message is, yeah, Republicans are kind of sick of you, or at least America is kind of sick of you.
I don't even know if it's like America, really. It's like, I think he's fine. Trump's fine with conservatives. He's fine with Republicans, pretty much all of them. Yeah, there's like a really small group, tiny group, but that's not surprising. But I think the big takeaway is people who are like the libertarians or moderates, the people in the middle who could swing because of inflation being as bad as it, like everything's so bad, people are more willing than ever to swing over to the other side to try something else because it's so bad. And what I think you see from what happened in the midterms is Trump became such a big character name, and all this stuff with the news and the investigations still going on, that people are at the point where they're not willing to make the jump no matter how bad it gets. But people in the conservative party that are like a Ron DeSantis or an Abbott, they stuck to their guns, and they're pretty divisive, right? They're big personalities themselves. But there was a lot of people that were willing to jump over or swing over for them. If anything, the big takeaway for conservatives is follow what those guys are doing, the Brian Kemps. because they picked up, especially Ron DeSantis. He made basically Florida is permanently conservative.
which I love the sound of that. I'm gonna have to move myself over to Florida. So Trump's in the 2024 election. He probably has enough to win the primary. I mean, not necessarily. We still have a year plus before any of the primaries start. So that's a lot of time. Really for anything to happen. I was listening to Ben Shapiro's show, and he's like, "That's a lot of time for people to get annoyed with you, Trump." Like, that's not necessarily the smartest move, because obviously it's a smart move in one way. Obviously he's Donald Trump. Throwing his name out there might scare away some people from choosing to run. But I think we'll see Liz Cheney throws her hat in, but then he's doing this weird tactic where he's attacking DeSantis. I don't think that's wise. I think DeSantis is someone you want to be seen with a lot to try to pull, show some unity and just kind of ride almost on DeSantis's coattails a little bit on his popularity.
I think that Trump is. I think people are already sick of Trump. Not conservatives. Like, people are tired of all the shenanigans, mostly of just the way media treats Trump.
Mm-hmm.
But just in general, people are sick of Trump, hearing about him. So I think because of that, it's the worst thing that can happen. Because if Trump is running, but he is not going to win the nomination. I don't think he will.
Really?
Because I think conservatives won't. Yeah, I think it'll come down to it. They're going to be unless, and this is the worst part about it, is Trump just starts throwing mud and digging up stuff, and it gets real bloody, which is not good, because then once you're nominated, if it is DeSantis or Trump, there's going to be a lot of open wounds already. It's going to be easy for the Democrats at that point.
Yeah, very, very easy. So that's why I just don't think it's smart. But obviously, Trump is going to try to run, and he is going to be his big personality. If you are DeSantis, you've got a way ahead of you. You're popular if you're DeSantis. Do you try to challenge Trump? Do you or do you wait it out?
Well, what I hope is happening, and we would never know this, but you hope, is that DeSantis and Trump are already talking, and they're discussing these things. Because you would hope that it's like Trump is pretty narcissistic, so maybe he's not doing this, but you would hope that they would have at least enough brains where they would decide, wait, we're in the same party. Why don't we work together? Let's talk together, see what we can do. Maybe DeSantis waits. Let's Trump do this and backs him, right? They figure out a deal, work something out.
Yeah.
You hope that's going on, right?
Yeah, because that's what I'm hoping
maybe
for.
Maybe DeSantis as a VP, right? Wouldn't that be cool?
That would be that. Honestly, I think that's the way forward for Trump. You get DeSantis on you behind you as your VP. That I think is Trump's way forward to victory. So that's why if I'm Trump, like get DeSantis, like be pictured with DeSantis. I don't know if DeSantis was invited or not to Trump's announcement at Mar-a-Lago, but like I would have invited DeSantis. Like I would want DeSantis next to me in a lot of this stuff. Get on that DeSantis train, because you
do not want to make him an enemy.
No,
right?
Because I don't think that's necessarily a race that Trump really wants.
And it's not good for conservatives in general. If those the two big names in the party, start slinging mud at each other, that's not going to be good.
It will be interested. I think I'll be interested to see who else announces. Hopefully, Cheney runs as a third party candidate and just saps votes away from Biden. But I'm not necessarily holding my breath out for that either.
Yeah, she could zap votes from the conservative too. Some of those. But I think it's going to be interesting. More interesting than Trump running is who's going to run against Biden. Right? Because there's like half the party seems to say like, no, you probably shouldn't do it. We need to get someone else. So who would that be? Especially if it was Trump running. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the Democrats operate like the mafia. So like there's never any cracks. Everyone walks in lockstep. So I think if Biden is like, I don't see the Democrat Party moving from behind Biden, because you can't really get anybody else up there and hope to win independence. Like, you can't run Kamala. Nobody likes Kamala. You Buttigieg is also like not extremely popular. So I don't think Democrats have a better option, because that's
Hillary Clinton. That's who's going to run. Hillary Clinton.
Oh boy.
I'm just kidding. God, I hope that's not true. I did hear that. So they started floating that. She started floating that. Like idea around just to see.
Well, I think
we're already like, no.
I was gonna say she's probably doing that. Like, oh man, it'd be hilarious if I ran, right? And everyone's like, yeah, no, it'd actually be the worst idea ever. Please don't. We hate you so much. We hate you so much. We voted for Donald Trump over you. Like, that is like, that should be an insult, because the Clintons are a political machine. So losing to Donald Trump, I think, is a great way to say, get the heck out of here.
Sure. Yeah, that's a big sign.
I think it'll be interesting. That's something we'll have to keep our ear on, the 2024 cycle, but it's still so far away. Trump got in so early. I'm kind of surprised. Do you think this will have any sort of an impact on the Georgia runoff?
Oh, absolutely. Because he's going to come back, because he was already back in Walker, so he's just going to come in harder and be there. So whether it's, I don't know if I'd go as far as to say it'll be a referendum on Trump, because I think it'll just be about Walker and Warnock.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's definitely going to have an impact on it.
Maybe Trump announcing and kind of pushing Walker to victory might give his campaign a little bit of momentum. But I don't know. I don't know how that's going to break in for the runoff.
Yeah, but I always I believe in the double-edged sword. So right, like, you got to think, yeah, if he actually pushes Walker, and that could be good for his prospects, right? It shows that he's the one who pushed him to victory. But what happens if the opposite happens? Because Trump's out there for Walker campaigning, Walker loses by a larger margin.
Yeah.
Right? That's like, because that's possible, because Trump's that wild of a person. He is that big of a personality, and things that's how crazy things are around him, where you could totally see something like that happen.
Yeah.
I would not be surprised.
So I guess we'll have to talk about the election runoff, the Georgia runoff, when it happens. It might give us some insights as to, I guess, the very early stages of 2024. So thanks, Mark.
It'll still be so far away, though.
Yeah.
Just remember that, like you pointed out, the election is a long, long ways away. So
we have a lot of time for Biden to continue to mess stuff up.
That's right. Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah. So once again, thanks, Mark, for hopping on, shooting the breeze about politics, and hopefully edifying our audience here.
Yeah, anytime. It's always fun.
Try to meet up again next month and push out something equally as educational.
Cool. I look forward to it.
So this is Big Red signing off for the Big Red for America show. See you all next time. If you want to see more from the Big Red from America team, you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Getter, and Parler. Once again, this is Big Red signing off for the Big Red for America show, where the opinions are always right and the facts are always cited.